Hello guys, here we go. How's everyone doing? Look at us up from Artemis. Thank you so much, Artemis, for the 42 months. Hi, from the boy, Cheese Kitties, Samo, Katyara, Rainbow. Hope everyone is doing fine. So are they... Oh, they're going already, actually. They're kinda late. I thought they would start at the full hour. But apparently they're already on it. Wait.
Alright.
Seems like they're just setting up, I guess.
Bet. And then Gigi will be hopping on real soon with us.
Okay.
So
we're gonna watch the interview.
there was one thing,
just see like what's up, I guess. I also want to go for the patch notes a bit. I haven't actually looked at the patch notes yet. So Meteor Sorg that sounds like cope.
I really do care about, like, I know that we have our, well, I have my personality and stuff. Oh, should I send ads right now? Oh
no.
Yeah, I should send ads first, so that the people don't get messed up on this. I forgot.
Do I have that emote?
I don't know if I can do a 3-minute. I guess that's,
okay.
That's all. This is I don't really stream much, you know.
I have new days.
You're new to this.
I mean, I don't. I just like play game. Like, you know what Karn always says? Karn always says, "I'm not a streamer. I am a gamer," and it's the most based. I personally feel.
Yeah.
And I feel the same way. Oh, creator dashboard. That's what it's called.
Have you guys
Stream manager? Is that what
there was like another interview, right?
I feel the
was
same.
there one with this? I heard.
You know, if
that already happened, right?
I would consider that way too much already.
Since it's like starting in 2 days, I guess. Is it like the last interview? I haven't really been following the PoE stuff. I was like busy the last days.
It's okay. That's what we have editors for, right?
Need to go for the patch notes and stuff later. Patch notes. 328 PoE.
You got time. They're running late apparently. So
yeah.
you run as many ads as you want. You monetize this as much as you can. I
mean, if I could disable the mid-roll right now, that'd be better. But you know how things are. You know, fucking Twitch.
Okay.
I must wait because it recently auto ran. What is this? Okay. So yeah, I guess we'll talk about the name of our pod. What we actually want to. For now, we're tentatively calling it Take the Bait. And the reason we're calling it that is because we want to just be really inviting. We want people to engage right off the bat in a way that's easy, accessible, and kind of disarming. We really want to be able to ask both kind of hard-hitting questions, but also be really respectful and always give people the opportunity to say no. That's why it's called Take the Bait, not we're baiting you or, you know, the master baiters. You know, we want you to be able to choose whether or not you want to take it. You know, you can choose whatever response you want to have, and I think this is where we're at. You know, yeah. And I know maybe Spawn's gonna feel differently later on and stuff. What do you really want to get out today, anyways? What are you really hoping to hear?
What I want to get out of today is kind of understand the split a little bit more and the 4-monthly patch cycle and how excited they are around that, and whether that is helping them workflow wise be able to create the game they want to create. Because a lot of the time I hear in GGG interviews that, you know, that's in the backlog, we're prioritizing something else right now, this is what we want to work on. But now that the official team split has happened, gives me a lot of confidence as someone that actually enjoys PoE 1 a lot more than PoE 2. That there's going to be a very clear and methodical approach to the game and kind of taking it back to that next level. I also am really excited because it seems like a massive patch right now. And I think that a lot of people like when the big patches hit, like, you know, reworked Atlas is always a really good league to be a part of. So I just want to hear kind of how excited they are about that and how their workflow is going now that they're kind of only working on the one game.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that they're headed that way with the one game thing. I think I kind of like it in a lot of ways, like, but then when I think about the problems, I think we like talked about this, but I saw a lot of the problems as being kind of shared across both games, at least.
Yeah.
In terms of like their sourcing, the causal mechanism. But hopefully they.
What do you want to get out of it?
What I want out of this EP, oof, you know that I just want to learn about balance. Actually, I feel like maybe I don't know how long we'll have them on for today, but the one question I've always really misunderstood, I think, is about balance in PvE games. Kind of the ethos there, the theory there. Back in 2016, when I did interview Chris, or 2017, or maybe it was 2018, he had already been alluding to a lot of the really problematic balance that they were worried about. Like, Righteous Fire was the thing he mentioned at the time.
How was this interview on Monday?
Scaling simultaneously. I think we've seen a lot of continued inclusion mechanics like that, so I'm curious about that. What's going on there? Yeah. And maybe like what their plan is for the future, what they see as problems, how they do their problem solving flows, stuff like that. But really high level, really balance focus, and maybe like a little bit about just like what kind of people they are, because I think last time we got a lot about like what's upcoming about the game, but the truth is like Andrew and Chris, Octavian are the teams are still relatively small from what I understand, and they really spearhead and kind of have a lot of like discretion and about what happens. I think it's gives you more predictive power as a player, as a content creator, as someone who just like watches PoE, someone who likes PoE, to understand like why they do the things they do, what they want, what their vision is for the game, stuff like that. And I know we have a lot of bad words in PoE, like vision, like friction, but I think these concepts, when they're introduced and contextualized properly, are actually really useful for showing where people are at, you know?
Yeah, do you know the cool thing about, I was watching the Zeus interview with Octavian and Chris, and it actually reminded me like of early days Riot. Like they very much obviously care a lot about the game and are very protective about the game. And I think that one thing GGG as a studio has done is like whenever I see interviews with people that directly work on the game, they are very passionate and connected to it, and they haven't really hit the area where they're so big that they're completely disconnected from what they're building. I actually felt like I was at Riot when some of that transition happened, and now Riot's obviously tried to cull back and go back down to like the indie game studio feel. But I think that from where I'm sitting, I get very excited when I listen to people as passionate about the game as they are, and obviously as protective about the game, because I think that it makes it easier to trust that the balance that they're trying to put into the game actually makes sense. And they actually know what they're talking about a little bit, which is nice.
Yeah, I was surprised they were able to keep that like in the Tencent era, because like the acquisition did happen, but then I realized that like the culture there was actually like you acquire a studio and just let them do whatever they want to do and fund them, which is like what it should be, right, in terms of that sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
And like, I mean, why not, right? You saw what happened in Po 2. Like that release was just absolutely insane. I mean, while we're waiting, do you know where you're starting at? Do you have a better idea yet?
Do I know where I'm starting? The league start?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know what I'm going to league start. I'm going to league start Orobot champion, but I just need to figure out how to get there. So I need to figure out.
Thanks for the EP, guys. It's been good talking to you.
What the first 70 levels look like. So I think, I don't know, like maybe I'll just run back some smite leveling with your old school POB. Update it for me. I asked you to do it already. Give me a smite POB.
Pub.
Yeah.
I know some good smite pubs. I don't know if we're allowed to talk about those names on live anymore, you know, so we'll have to see.
Give me a General's Cry POB. Can I play General's Cry again? Surely.
Yeah, I wonder, like, I've always been, if today, like, ask about mechanics like that, things like General's Cry are always so weird, right? They're so complex, and they're so specific, and I still don't know necessarily how they work. Like, I've been playing with Stack Strike General's Cry for a while, and I don't know why it does the thing that it does. I don't know why it is that you can hit with it, and the General's Cry clones can hit and disappear and keep these static strikes on the ground, and they're there dealing damage, and then they only disappear when you resummon them. It's like, what are the instances tied to? What's the damage instance tied to? How come they can be gone and that still be there, but then they disappear at this point? How come that doesn't work that way for Earthquake? You know, I think, like, man, peeping under the hood would be crazy in terms of how much more power it would give us. But the specifics are always just like, kind of feel like, you know, it could just be like spaghetti here, spaghetti there, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I assume it is. Like, I know when I talk to people that I was really good friends with that worked on a League of Legends team, that, you know, you always say, like, oh, peeping under the hood would be so fun. And they're like, no, it sucks. It's like, you know, you change how long Phoenix stance lasts on Udyr, and then you just completely break the whole game. And, like, you all of a sudden have bugs on a Mumu. So,
yeah, they were supposed to start like 5 minutes ago, so they was just like chatting now, I guess we're waiting.
Because the skill is, I mean, I completely I think you actually had to put out like an FAQ on it, like when you
I did.
created the build. Like I was just summoning clones way too quickly and just like butchered my DPS completely on that build. So it's good fun.
Yeah, these days I'm getting lazier and lazier. I think I was really inspired by like Captain Lance. He recently was like, "Oh, I don't even make League Start. I don't even use POB anymore." And then I'm like, "Oh yeah, I get why." I was like, he must be an absolute mathematical genius. But then I realized, I guess if all you need to do is get more intelligence or strength, then you don't really need a POB. You just need to figure out which items give you the most of those, and you just slowly craft those in Bestiary. And I was like, I guess I can start doing it that way too, not really think about the mechanics. And I kind of mess with that. He's like, it's right? Like, I think I'm always. I mean, I don't like to reference Pop Mia too much, but like, Moneyball was such a great movie. And I think anytime you can distill things down and simplify things and reduce mental load, whether in like gameplay or in build making, it's kind of OP, right? I don't like the stacker thing for that reason.
So you going stacker again? Is that what you just announced your whole stream? You finally picked your build?
I'm playing Grey Wind this league. I mean, almost certainly Grey Wind. I don't think there's much of a chance I get away from that. It's like more fun than playing ES, and I like Assassin. I haven't played right side in a while now. I've been kind of stuck on this a bit meta pilled for a while. I don't know. I think when I popped out, it's really interesting because like the endgame content is very like questionable, right? Like, what are you really trying to farm for? We used to farm like, what does your character look like? How's it strong? But increasingly, it's about specialization. Like, are you setting up your character for what X content? How do you do that best? And it's like, if I want to do like Baldos early and stuff, I think like life stack could be decent. I'm a little bit worried about budget, because sometimes on League I'm actually kind of poor, but then I realized all the leagues in which I look at J2 POB and I'm like, oh, I have like maybe like 200-300 divines on that character. It's because I've been sick and then I would only play for like 10 hours. But if it's like, if I'm not sick, it should be fine. And then I would make a really cool character, showcase some stuff, maybe see him, maybe it'll flop. Like, I don't know. I haven't tested anything. It's been a hard pre-league, right? This is.
All right, let me ask you a question, right? Because you're obviously running back softcore trade because you're talking about hundreds of
going on in this chat, man?
What made you go so heavily? Like, I think the last 3 leagues now you've started softcore trade and tried to lead the economy there. Like, what made you invest so much more heavily into SC trade than kind of your SSF or HC trade days of kind of last year? Because you go in peaks and troughs, right? At the moment, you seem to really be on your SC trade era.
And I don't think I've gone hard in economy ever. Risha would be the closest thing, but it was more just I want to make a character. I think.
Do you think softcore trade gets you closer to winning a gauntlet? That's my question for you. That was like, I feel like I'm going to run out of time to get to the end of the question. So I'm curious.
I'll put it this way. And this is probably the last thing we'll say before GG gets on. I think that when I got COVID and then had lingering COVID symptoms and then went away for a year, but might have been carrying a certain, viral matter in my body. And then I met Ben at the Alpha podcast, at the Alpha release for PoE2. That was more productive in terms of increasing my chances of winning Gauntlet than anything else that I've done. Even though he didn't get sick. If he did, that would have been my best chance. Maybe next time. But yeah, let's go check in with GG now. I'm gonna go on OneSource and do some audio tests.
Okay.
Oh god. And let's go here. I'm gonna turn Discord off for a bit, and I'm gonna skip calls. Cool. I'll check sources too. What's good, dude? Couch is crazy. Yes, you're a little quiet.
Oh.
You're quiet. I have you guys at 200 already. I think you guys should turn up the mic side if you can.
We're looking at this is Jungroan. He's like one of the biggest like PoE creators, and he has an interview with GG. So we're watching that, and then we're gonna go through some patch notes and some stuff. And maybe I'm even gonna log in. Actually, do I have my game updated? I have no idea. It's been a while. Jungle Ryan. Okay, let's do this here. Last played in December, yeah, right before the season launch. Oh. What is going on? Ah, okay, he's like resizing it. D4 expansion waiting room. Kind of. Less than 2 months, man. It's next month. That's actually crazy to think about.
1, 2, 3.
Next month.
Hopefully not super echoey and loud.
No, that sounds good. Yeah. All right, let me just get my last pieces here, and we should be all good to go. I gotta line them up. I did everything manually, guys. It changed. All right,
Watching
there we
the
go.
mastermind that is Jung create his stream this is peak entertainment.
You know what they say? It's not about this. No, wait, that's not right. We're focused about the content and stuff. What's up, guys? Octavian, Andrew, hello. You guys good? You guys can hear me all good?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Amazing. Welcome to the first EP of Take the Bait with me and Spawn. I thought I'd be able to take the chance to introduce you guys again shortly. I know that you guys got introduced recently. It was Ziz's pod, but yeah, are we all good for that?
Sure.
Sounds good.
Cool. All right, so formerly described as the bedrock of PoE 1 by Octavian, and similarly described by secret well-respected informants as the GOAT, my GOAT, and base savior, responsible for a lot of the major work on Path of Exile 1 these days. This is Andrew. It's someone I would love to hear more about, more gloat and glaze, a little bit behind the scenes, but can't wait for the future. And our second guest today is Chris Octavian, renowned amateur League of Legends caster from the time when I was playing amateur League of Legends too. You could call us actually both former amateur content creators. On the reel, I've watched a ton of your casting reel from back in the day when I used to scout for NACS, and he's actually one of the most underrated PoE build makers back in the day. I've still owned your Rainbow Trapper as inspiration for 2 races actually in the late 3.1s. Remade that on a quiz, saw the old Krima Necro stuff that I really liked back in the day too. I know Rise was part of that as well, but really underrated from back in the day, and can't wait to be talking to you here today. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, this is a deep cut, man.
I mean, the content, it was actually a smaller world than I remember back then too, but maybe we can get into that a little bit. You know, there's some cross-cutting stuff, as you know, Spawn's a caster these days, or it was.
I'm not a caster these days. I was a caster 7 years ago. So
it's like these days,
yeah.
Man. So our podcast called Take the Bait. A lot of our questions we've already we've talked briefly about what we might want to cover, but at the same time I want to kind of start with something that you guys can choose to engage with or not. I think it's just something I've been curious about. Are you guys both work mostly on the PoE 1 game, right? Almost exclusively?
At this point, yeah, we're exclusively on PoE 1. I mean, both of us have jumped between the 2 games over the years we've been here at the company, but yeah, as of the last few expansions, I've been only on PoE 1. I think Andrew has too.
Yeah, I think generally maybe from that period of 2020 up until 2024ish, I would have said I was exclusively on PoE 1, and then in the lead up to 010 and PoE 2's release, I was flicking back and forth a bit. But I'd say now I'm back on PoE 1 solely.
Amazing. So then do you guys think that PoE 1 is the best ARPG on the market right now because you guys work on PoE 1, or do you guys work on PoE 1 because it's the best ARPG on the market right now?
Well, I don't really think of ARPGs as best and worst. I play all of them generally, except strangely, I've never played Diablo 2. But I plan to
Whoa!
play it at some point. I'd say my favorite historically might have even been Grim Dawn or over Path of Exile 1, but it's pretty close between those two.
Sick.
See, I'm a far less educated gamer when it comes to this department. I'm very much a very singular kind of person. Like I have an obsession and I focus on that to probably the detriment of a lot of other things. So like I've really not played very many other ARPGs. Like when I go to play a video game, it's usually Path of Exile or like one or two other games. I just don't have a lot of breadth when it comes to that.
Yeah. I think I'm actually the same as you. Like I've had very limited ARPG experience outside, and I think like actually over the past couple of years, seeing a lot of the convergence and cross-cutting from the two PoE games has been like, unreal now. And like it's like once upon a time when they said like, yo, the benefits, you know, you're gonna see them in PoE1 and we're gonna see like the iterations between both. I really like didn't believe that, but it's so much more present now. Yeah.
Well, that's sort of the nice thing of having the two games now is like both games can just steal the best parts from each other. And it's like you don't have to use them in the exact same way because they are different games, but it's like, have we talked about the volatile Varlord? Would you be okay if you want to explain it, or
Whatever
is
you
that
want to
spoiler?
talk about. Go ahead.
Oh, well, you know how in PoE 2 you have the corruption outcome where it divines the ranges of unique items outside of their normal ranges? I think there's a Mirage currency that's going to be doing that, which we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah, I actually don't. So another designer was the one who designed all of the like specific reward outcomes for various mechanics and mirages. So I don't actually remember off the top of my head exactly where it comes from, but it does come from Mirage.
Okay, so how much of those mechanics are like, hey, this cool thing exists in 2, I want to bring it to 1, versus, hey, let's design something that's going to go into both games simultaneously?
Rarely is something designed with the intention that it cross-pollinates into both games. Yeah. I say rarely, like I can't think of an example. Often it's, you know, this is a cool thing that has been in one of the games or the other and has been, you know, has shown through battle testing, so to speak, that it's something either players like or we like, or hopefully both. And why not adapt it? You know, if it's a good idea and we can adapt it to one game or the other, working around however that game, you know, the constraints, so to speak, of whichever game, then wouldn't you want to do that?
Yeah, for sure. And do you guys like feel like the selfish plagiarism in that sense then like exists in like across other games as well? Like Andrew, like how often are you picking up like a different ARPG and thinking like, hey, I need to figure out a way to do this in PoE1, and then like hopefully therefore it's like going across like multiple teams? Or is it something where you guys try and stay internally with that? Like how does the actual design philosophy work with kind of how you look at mechanics in that way?
I mean, there's definitely conscious decisions to not straight up just like plagiarize something from another game, for sure. I guess most of the things you'd pick up might actually be like you'd unconsciously gather like certain cool aspects from other games. Like a funny story actually is like we started developing all these holy skills like right at the very start of this league cycle. So Chris was coming up with all these cool holy skill ideas, and then I think it was a few weeks later, Diablo 4 announced Paladin. So we were like all worried. It's like, oh, hopefully they don't think that because Diablo 4 dropped Paladin that we're going to have to, we're just like straight up copying them.
You guys should have copied the monetization strat.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it. You should have copied the Paladin monetization strat too. Super smart.
See, this is where my lack of knowledge of other ARPGs gets in the way because I have no idea what they did for that. But yeah, even like the fact that Holy Hammers is called Holy Hammers, apparently there is a skill in Diablo that has a similar name, and I got some feedback internally that like maybe we should change the name because players will expect it to behave a certain way that it doesn't. But I don't know. Holy Hammers is a cool name. I like alliteration.
That's okay, yeah, because when Spectral Helix came out, that was sort of, I remember thinking at the time like that was the thing that's most related. And we were really excited about Helix, but obviously it's gone through its sagas as a skill. Actually, it was kind of really dominant for a while, right? I think we had that as the premier like skill for a while, and I think I'm gonna use that to segue into what I really am interested in, which is balance, because I think that kind of set melee weapon balance back for a long time. For about like a year, Helix was the skill. Damage numbers weren't there for anything else. And I guess the thing that I've always been thinking about is PvE game balance is really weird, right? In a sense of you're not actually balancing for like play rate against other players or win rate against other players. And I've always been curious kind of what the core priorities you're thinking about are. There's a lot more specifics, but how do you guys see that kind of concept in your context, in your domain?
Well, I think the goal isn't necessarily to get everything perfectly balanced, just because of how ever-changing our game is. I feel like it's a little bit of a futile task, and we don't really have the time resource to develop to get that into like a perfect spot every time. But what you'd prefer to have is really, well, me personally, I just like a variety. I don't want the same skill to be running the meta for like 2 years or whatever, like historically. I mean, to be fair, we probably have had some skills that have been on top for quite a while now, and maybe we should more radically shift them out. But I think, yeah. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. You have any follow-up to that?
I think like I want to hear first. I think because I think as you're talking, it doesn't need to be a clear answers, but getting the direction of where you guys are at is the most interesting for me to start this. I think, yeah, like how you guys individually feel about it.
One of the important things as well is, you know, you're correct that it's not a PvP game. So like if skill A is strong, it doesn't make, you know, a player's experience worse who isn't playing that necessarily because they're not playing against skill A. But it still does in a way if something is like, you know, the whole premise of a game like Path of Exile is here. We have this really big puzzle. Come and solve it. You know, we have all of these moving pieces, all these uniques and ascendancies and skills and supports and whatever. Come and solve this or solve some little corner of it. And if there's a skill that just does a bajillion damage out the box with basically no effort, it's not a very interesting puzzle anymore, is it? So like that is part of it. Like there needs to be some, you know, balance needs to be in place so that it isn't just like I slot this skill in and win without any extra effort, which, you know, you can have your own subjective opinion on how well of a job we've done on that historically. And then you also don't want players feeling like, you know, there are a lot of choices that are basically pointless because this thing over here does everything better than every other choice. So like those are probably the two driving reasons why balance is important, even in a game that isn't PvP centric.
Do you guys feel like you're a little, or is there a reason why it's a bit more conservative these days as far as changing goes? Because I understand the resource side, but let's say that the concerns then that you're bringing up right now are things like a really stale meta where things are like constantly the same, and then having like false heterogeneity, or false choice, like an illusion of choice, where you could pick all these skills, but like, you know, lightning strike is better than the rest. Not anymore, but hypothetically, right? What's sort of the hesitation these days? Because I remember we used to have those massive balance patches. We'd see like 20 on the low end or like a couple hundred skills just have their numbers changed. Is that a matter of resources these days still? Is that just about care? Is that like, what are the drivers behind not doing that these days?
I don't know. I guess it just hasn't been brought up very much. Like, I think there have been times in the past where the higher ups are like, don't shake the boat too much, because if people don't have their like tried and true safe skill, then they'll be more reticent to play the next league. So like from a personal point of view, I'd love if everything just got scrambled without even like a huge amount of thought going into like what goes up and what goes down. But going back to your like whole heterogeneity comment, that is one of the other axes of balance that we can address. Like if all the skills scale exactly the same, like a lot of the spells scale in the same way and a lot of the attacks scale in the exact same way. So if one of them is 10% better than all those others, then why would you play any of the other ones? So you need to kind of like try to differentiate all the skills as well in terms of like their damage shapes and their clear speed and their single target potential and their scaling axes.
I need to add that.
So I have a question. I want to jump in here a little bit. Andrew, I don't know if you've played League of Legends, but Jung, Octavia, and I obviously have.
Strangely, I've never tried it.
Okay, cool. So then you're going to absolutely miss this one. But in League of Legends, when they balance, they like take an average player, like a gold player, and then they balance around that. But if there's outliers, say, you know, a champion is fine in gold, but then has like 100% pick rate in pro, then they'll obviously
Wait, I have it
down
already.
and be like,
Okay.
well, we don't want to see the exact same thing played in every single
I didn't
pro game.
realize.
I was wondering if you guys could speak a little bit about what areas you look at when you're looking to balance skills. Is because, like, I was talking to Jung about this. Like, you're not balancing for Jung. He's playing like 20 hours a day on League Start. Are you balancing around someone that plays, you know, 5 hours a day and the journey that they have through Path of Exile, League Start? How do you look at that? And then I think that a lot of people talk about skills in terms of how League Start actually works around the abilities, but what other levers do you look at as the journey of the league happens? Because, you know, sometimes we're very slow to actually pick up which skills are good and bad as they're introduced into the game, in my opinion.
I feel like that's more of like a global question that goes across many, many leagues rather than on a per league basis, because the game's been out for so long now that we've kind of ended up in this steady state equilibrium where this is how things are and this is the difficulty of the game. And every so often we might shake that up with like making Act 1 extremely hard at some point in time and not doing it to the other acts. But yeah, I'm not really sure. Do you have anything on that?
I mean, on a specific skill by skill basis, usually my playtesting will consist of like, how does this skill feel immediately when I get it, and for, you know, maybe a few dozen levels thereafter? How does it feel in early maps? How does it feel in like yellow maps? How does it feel in like red maps? And usually when I'm doing those tests, it's like alch, enter map, do some combat, fight a boss, you know. So yeah, I'm not necessarily doing. I mean, we do have a QA department that also will test, and the QA department actually skews mostly, in my experience, towards testing things in their end game and like giga juiced and, you know, super entrenched established player sort of context, because usually when we're hiring for QA, that is the kind of person that we hire. We're hiring, you know, people with thousands and thousands and thousands of hours in the game. So often what actually gets overlooked in testing is that stuff that I try and test while I'm, you know, doing the major tweaks in the implementation to the skill, is the experience of it when you first get it, and the experience of it in like, you know, on a crappy character who's just hit maps. Because, and that's not to say that we always get that perfectly right. There are skills that I have implemented that I would like to go back and try and improve that specific experience on. But that is, you know, the first impression, and that is quite important for sure.
So then you guys are speaking from it from almost like a vacuum, not in a bad way, but from like your guys' perspective. There aren't like kind of key vignettes of like player vignettes or like player archetypes that you'd be thinking about, like, oh, we need to think about like Joe Blow, who enters maps at like 20 hours. Like, this guy is going to be weaker in this kind of way. Does that sort of like, is there a kind of average player or like medium player that you're thinking about when you do like balancing changes? Or is it just about like this skill
I
compared
have
to
the
other
one,
skills?
the
Or is
music at 20. I have it like
tools
very
in the
low,
system
but it's
compared to
okay.
other tools in the system?
I'd say it's more on the skill compared to other skills and this tool compared to other tools. It's like I said, we're at this like sort of equilibrium state with the game where if we're thinking about the average player just getting into the maps, we're probably thinking on more of a global level. Like, for example, in Settlers League, when we like decided to buff basically all the melee skills scaling massively. So that's a thing of like, okay, melee players aren't having a good experience. Players typically think that melee is behind other archetypes. So let's bring melee up everywhere. Rather than on a per skill basis, to me, it's more like this skill is relatively worse than another, or this skill is relatively better than another, and we should bring them more closely in line, while also trying to differentiate them in like ways that aren't just damage.
So like in terms of that, then I think like, yeah, we've kind of ended up in a really skill centric place, but are there other levers that you guys are more comfortable pulling in terms of rebalancing? Because I know like the passive tree, for instance, is fairly static as far as things go, but we've seen some pretty big shifts in terms of, say, like gearing wise, right? Like the gear meta has changed drastically in the past 2 years, where an energy blade or an energy shield stacker used to be really weak, and probably for the past year now it's been very, very dominant in both like racing starts and hardcore and whatnot. So like what levers would you actually look to other than skill gems when it comes to rebalancing PvE?
I mean, our head of QA likes to say that everything is always more complicated than you think it is, and he's absolutely correct there. And it's one of the reasons why the past few leagues, I would say, we haven't seen huge shakeups in those large systems, because you can't really adjust a large system like that in isolation. If we were to go in and make a lot of changes to the passive tree, it would probably have knock-on effects to some uniques and some ascendancies and some skills and X, Y, and Z. And that isn't a reason not to do it. I would love to do all of these things. But yeah, it's tackling any of those larger systems is often going to be like one of the focal points of a league's of an expansion, if that makes sense. And that's often how we think about it. A given expansion is like there's we want to get X number of focal points and then a lot of miscellaneous extra stuff alongside it. For Mirage, for instance, it was the endgame rework, the league itself. Probably something that I'm forgetting going off the top of my head.
Yeah. That's not to say we haven't done many recently. Like, for example, you're probably going to notice you're finding a lot more currency this league.
True.
You might be slamming exalts on like crappy gear that you probably weren't slamming exalts on before. And I think in like a few of the previous leagues, there might be like subtle things that have vastly affected your campaign itemization, like the Gambler, for example, being in every town.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So like there's definitely
Cool. I was going to say, I part of what you just said was like really cool, Octavian, because I think that people, now that there is just like the PoE one team, are very interested in like kind of how you guys view your backlog, and like if there are any things in that list that you are like, we didn't get to it this league, but like I really want to get to it. And then from someone that used to work at Riot, I'm really interested like how much of it is a push system onto people working on stuff versus how much of it is a pull system of, hey, we have this like backlog. And Andrew, I'm really like, I love skill gems. Like I want to jump in, like grab like 40 of these things and change them before the new patch. Like you guys talk about like your workflow going into like how new leagues kick off and kind of what it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, usually it'll be around this time, actually. The release of an expansion, we'll be talking about the next one. And it'll be like trying to work out, those large points first. Because, yeah, we have a backlog of like, like I said, we have like 3 or 4 focal points to every expansion. We have a backlog of probably like 20 focal points worth of stuff that we want to do. And you can only fit 3 or 4 into a given 4-month dev cycle. And then usually within the course of that 4-month dev cycle, you get to the end and you realize, there's this thing that would have been really cool and we could fit that in maybe next time. And it's like that cartoon meme of the guy who's trying to fit something into his daily schedule and he's pulling sleep out in order to do it. And yeah, we have internally we have an issue tracking system that has a backlog of a ton of these things, but often the issue tracking system is more for like the hyper specific stuff, and for the broader scope related things that's done more like just in conversations between designers and tracked in like internal documents.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of like cost benefit analysis that goes into like what type of things we touch as well. Like for example, next league, I'm not saying we're definitely not doing this, but next league we could say, okay, we want to rework mana costs throughout the game. And it's like, if you look hard at anything, you're going to find innumerate problems. But the thing is this a worthwhile goal? It's like, yes, okay, so Melee has this issue where mana eventually devolves into everyone using mana leech or minus mana cost on their rings. And it's like, should mana matter that much to Melee builds? Should it matter as much as it currently is for spells? Like, do they scale mana cost correctly? Are there any builds that are like particularly mana intensive? But that to fully audit mana is going to take a ton of our time, and then we might come out of it ending up making a bunch of changes which make people unhappy. So touching mana in that way is probably not going to be on our agenda. Well, maybe it will be at some point, but definitely not in the near future.
It's one of the
Dude,
things
this
that
chat is
Mark was
completely
talking about in
cracked.
Q&A where
What the
like,
fuck, man?
it's really easy to be scared of touching some of these systems, be scared of touching, for instance, the endgame changes that we did this league, because there's an established status quo that is pretty good, but like it could probably be better in a lot of cases. And you could just keep iterating on existing systems and basically continue to put icing on the cake, so to speak. But sometimes you have to go and bake another cake. And that's much, much harder.
Yeah, I think like in terms of the system side, the thing that stood out to me most this patch, I think the intelligence nerf was the single, from my perspective, best balance line I've ever seen in a patch note. And that
Well,
was
the
system-wide,
interesting
right?
thing about that is it was one of our QA who brought it up, but we were just looking at the relative ratio of the attributes compared to the bonuses they give and comparing that to the small node values on the passive tree. And all of them were basically correct, except the amount of energy shield you get from intelligence. Like, for example, I think on the passive tree, a small evasion node would grant you like 14% increased evasion, while a small energy shield node would be like 6 or 7%. So the fact that dexterity and intelligence were giving the same amount of percent evasion and energy shield was just wrong. And I guess that's just been wrong forever. Not to say everything needs to be perfectly symmetrical, but yeah, it was definitely
6 or 7.
justification for the nerf outside of it just being historically very good for a while.
Okay, that's more like simplified then. So when it came to like bigger like when you're talking, I'm thinking about Expedition right now, as a patch, because I totally agree. I think the public reception to system-wide changes can be skewed very, very negative. And I was on that side for like probably a year and a half, where like 3.15 was like doomsday for me. I probably wasn't as vocal back then, but like I remember thinking, "Oh my god, I'll never be able to go through a map again or go through the campaign." I remember walking to Blood Aqueducts in a race, getting frozen, and not pressing my flask and dying and thinking this game is doomed. But on retrospect, I think it's, and this might be unpopular, one of the like most important balance patches that ever happened. So, is it a matter of building up like equity or trust, or like, and then also on the flip side, how do you see that patch? Like, how do you see a patch like Expedition in the grand scheme?
Well, I think there's things in the Expedition patch that I very strongly agree with, and then there's a bunch of mistakes we made on the patch which I think sold it more than it needed to be sold. So, for example, the damage support nerfs are like, I was very happy with those changes because the damage supports at that time were just like 50% more damage on average for a damage support, and that basically invalidated a lot of the more interesting supports in the game. But the things that were definitely an issue with that patch were the mana cost multipliers being changed on supports. I think the numbers were ran, and it's like certain melee builds, just if you were using those same supports, it doubled your mana cost, which is definitely not acceptable. And then there was also, I think there was some problems with the flask changes, but I can't actually remember the specifics of those now. But yeah, I think Expedition certainly burnt us a little bit in the sense of like going and doing a full nerf patch. I don't know if we've done a patch since then on that scale in terms of like character power nerfs.
The one that I would be thinking about is not so much like system wide, but casters took a pretty big hit, I would say, especially in early game during the Divine Blessing change. That one was like really big. And then the changes to inspiration, going from additive to multiplicative were really big for like casters across the board. I think that's probably responsible for a lot of like why there's a dearth of casters right now in like the early game. Can't think of anything else though.
Yeah, those two changes don't really come to mind. I'm thinking more of like a wide scale system change that just makes everyone weaker. But yeah, I can't really think of anything since Expedition. But there certainly would have been nerfs were done.
Well, like, I guess for me, like that kind of was like like pretty large scale. I mean, I guess there were casters using mana, and there was Archmage, and there was the buffs there. But for like a long time, I think EB and like EBMOM specifically, those two things were really dominant of like at least the league start caster meta. And maybe I'm wrong there. Well, I guess let me just ramble here instead. Or go completely differently. How wrong do you think I am? Or maybe more broadly, how dumb do you think the average like content creator, build maker, streamer is in terms of actually identifying what's strong and what isn't?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in on this because Jung told me yesterday that he thinks that PoE content creators are now too good. They've got the game figured out. And I was like, I am really curious to see whether the developers actually think you guys are good at figuring out their game, because I don't know whether that's true. Like, I think that every now and again, like, people completely whiff on what is actually strong in the current meta, and then you find it like 6 months later.
Well, this is just anecdotal because I played Kinetic Fusillade last league, right? I leveled it throughout the game and it was super duper smooth. and I played it all through in-game. And then usually what I do is I farm up a ton of currency and I'm like, okay, what am I going to invest my next build into? So I actually go on my local dev client and try out a ton of people's builds, like build creators ones that I see on Ninja. And it's like Kinetic Blast just didn't do it for me. Fusilade's just better. So
Thanks,
people,
Richard.
even though
Appreciate
Kinetic
it.
Blast was the more popular skill last league, I guess people didn't pick up on Fusillade so quickly, but it does seem to be pretty popular now.
I guess the other side of that coin, though, is like people will come up with builds that we just never saw coming in the first place. You know, like the whole, I don't remember the name of the content creator, so I feel a little bad not being able to shout them out specifically, but the guy who made the build that constantly canceled his own portal cast in order to spam out, you know, spells, like that was not expected and is a very cool build.
You know what's crazy? Stuff like that. I remember on week 1 of the league, there was like someone sent me a video of Billy showcasing the interaction, and I think I had forwarded it to GGG like right away. I was like, hey, there's no way this thing lives past like, I'm not even gonna bother making a build with this. There's not a chance this thing lives. And I saw it come up like a month later on an actual build. I'm like, what?
Cast on Bottle.
When it comes to things like that, you know, like how often? That's just like a bug, basically, right? So
Sure. You know, I mean, you're correct. It is a bug. I think that has been addressed in this patch, but it's still extremely creative and cool to leverage that. Like,
wait, can I clarify right there then? Can I just
Sure.
take that as a piece? So you said it's cool to leverage a bug, and it's cool if I do that in the future,
no,
right?
Jug, no.
in
It's all
some
good, right?
contexts, this is an extremely blurry subjective line. So like there is no like people look for like this, you know, word from on high, this authoritative take on like, you know, okay, what can I do? What isn't a bug? Like I can't anticipate the bugs that will be found. We try to. We have a QA department that's dedicated to trying to, but there might be, you know, there's always the chance that there's something in the game that, you know, I've overlooked, or you know, all of us as developers have overlooked that gets found, and then it just has to be subjectively assessed in that time. Like it is really, unfortunately, just purely case by case.
No, and I think that makes a lot of sense. But Octavian, I'm kind of interested in your thoughts on like the OG question. Like, do you think that content creators
It's a
are
1 hour
up
video.
to date with
What
what
the
is
fuck?
strong within the game, or do you think that, you know, are we playing in free show what was actually strong at the start of Keepers? Like, how good do you feel like the
Portal on right
community
click.
and content creators specifically are at reading that meta balance that's within the game?
There's definitely some lag, for lack of a better term, I think there, but I think that's not necessarily like, I wouldn't want to say that's because, you know, the people playing the game at the highest level aren't smart enough to find these builds. There are definitely people who are making
I would
extremely
make
clever
that
builds.
comment for you. That's fine.
Like, well, no, because I have an interesting perspective on this, because I was a content creator for Path of Exile for years before joining the team, and if you want to be really successful at League Start, what you want to do, like the perfect build, is a build that has some new stuff going on that also is on a foundation that people trust. And then people will be like, oh, I know that this can be strong, but there's also some new cool interaction or new cool unique or whatever that it's using that can draw me in. Like people want, you know, I know this is going to work. I know this is going to be foundationally good, and also a little bit of spice. Like that's the perfect build guide. You know, you'll get the most traction, the most people watching, you know. So like there is an incentive to innovate a little bit and not too much at League Start, to be honest.
Okay, so let's talk about that, because on top of like whether they're good or bad, there's obviously PoE for a new player especially, and for a lot of intermediate players. If you don't have a build guide, you struggle to play the game. Like that's just straight up true. So how do you guys view like dev versus content creator relationship in terms of like actually putting out these good build guides? Because you're right, if you have someone put out a bad build guide, it completely destroys League Start for a lot of people. They never log into the game again. So how do you guys view that, and you know, what's your current thought on GGG's relationship with like content creators and build guide management? And, you know, third-party tools as a whole, right? Path of Building is like just so handy to be able to actually use all these things. And I know that people have been
Pretty cool
asking for
interaction,
like
actually, Seppi.
in-client mapping out the passive tree and things like that. How do you view all of this symbiotic relationship?
Well, I mean, I think overall content creation for the game and build guides and stuff have been a massive boon. You're correct that there are occasionally, you know, maybe there's a build guide that goes out that doesn't do, that people get baited into, for lack of a better word, that is, maybe does ruin some people's League start experience. But what we can really do on the dev side about that is just try and make the game more approachable in general, so that, I don't think we'll get to the point where you don't necessarily need any build guide at all. We'll see. But we can definitely do more on that front. For one thing, like, the whole keywording system from PoE 2 is something that I'm personally really keen to bring back to PoE 1, because it's way better than the hold alt for reminder text system that we have right now. If we can get more ways to onboard people into the game without having to alt tab out to a wiki or go to a build guide, then the risk of that is minimized, right?
When it comes to
where does the name of this podcast come from? Just heard the word bait.
I think people are really incendiary. People will say all kinds of things. The truth is, I think that I have never, ever made a bad build. There's just bad players that copy them poorly. And if
you're better than me.
If a good player copied my bad build
on my YouTube
good.
channel, they do not hold up.
Actually, I mean, there's been, I think, where does that come from is actually kind of interesting, because
what system? Like hold
let's say I have
alts
a
for
reputation
tooltips?
for baiting people with the build. Let's just say, hypothetically. I'm not saying that's the truth. I think a lot of it has to do with skill complexity. So there's a skill that I'm seeing on this current patch that I think might be incredibly bait. I think it is potentially powerful, but looks to be weak. And I think it's Holy Hammer. It's the one where it's like you consume a power charge and you have the cascading thing. Is that Holy Hammer?
Mm-hmm. The row of hammers, yeah, sure. Yeah.
So there's been like speculation about overlaps and how much damage does this do, because I think a lot of times we're trying to moneyball skills to get it down to, if you do everything correctly in this way and you have the correct scalars for this skill and package it correctly, what is that damage effectiveness when you calculate attack speed and everything? I think there might be like overestimation on the Holy Hammer, for instance, because we don't know about the consistency of overlaps and how much damage it actually does. So from my perspective, I see that a lot of that risk, or like whether something will be good or bad, and that sort of like unknown factor and the complexity is actually just about not knowing how a skill functions, specifically as it pertains to hit rate, right? And I'm not sure like what you could or would even want to do to elucidate that better for players.
I don't know, because I think this fundamentally comes down to like what kind of player I am as well, because like we have this game that, like I said earlier, is this incredibly complex puzzle, and that kind of encourages people to solve it, and it also attracts people who want to solve that puzzle. And for a lot of people, it's just about like solving the biggest number, like, or maybe you pick a skill and then from there you solve the biggest number for it. Whereas when I'm approaching a build, I more want to like get the numerical aspect of it to a point that's comfortable, and then it's about solving how the playstyle feels for me. I don't know. I feel like I'm not answering your question super well. I'm not trying to dance around it. I think I have a very different way of thinking about this sort of thing than necessarily translates well onto like, a DPS estimate or just numerical estimates of how effective a character is. Like, that's just not necessarily how I look at a build most of the time.
Yeah, I feel like from a player's point of view, the new skills are like, there's more excitement in not knowing how effective it is just by the numbers off the gem, because of all those external factors, by not knowing the hit rates or the number of overlaps, for example. So I feel like I sort of like there not being perfect information going into a release for that.
I think I do too.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say that's interesting because you got someone like Jung that's going to look at a skill and he's going to pull it apart, and if the damage effectiveness isn't high enough, he's just never going to touch the skill, right? He's like not even going to do it. Then I assume that there's like the average person that is like, oh, I played Paladin in all of these other games. There's now Paladin skills. No matter how little damage I do, I'm going to try and grind this one out and stick with the skill. And I guess like that becomes like nearly an economy question, because it's like, okay, if the skill operates in that way, then how far ahead or behind do you become in the economy? Because if you play a great skill, you get ahead if you play the game enough, and then you're able to make the skill even better. So I think that that's actually quite interesting, going back to the first area of like balance of like how you approach like how these skills operate within in a game that has such a big economy on League Start, because I think that that is something that we were also quite interested in, is like, do you guys balance your skills around like, this is mainly a SSF player that's going to interact with chat a little bit, or do you guys think about your skills as in like, hey, we have, especially in softcore trade, we have like a completely wide open economy. You have access to completely every single item in the game theoretically, and a lot of them are quite cheap after like 2 or 3 games. That's what we expect the players to be able to utilize to be able to create these build guides.
I will say that, like, when I'm approaching trying to come up with skill concepts, like, all of that is not unimportant, but it is secondary to, does this skill have a cool power fantasy? Like, does this skill have a cool, unique way that it functions and that fulfills a certain, like, I want to be dropping giant hammers on huge packs of monsters, like, that is why Holy Hammers exists. And then from there, it's okay, well, what spacing do we need on the hammers in order to have it be competitive in terms of overlap? What effectiveness does this skill need, given that it functions this way? But like, we first determine, how does the skill need to function in order to fulfill the cool base fundamental concept, and then work out the balance around that. And that sometimes means that you get to the point where you're trying to work out the balance around the cool base fundamental concept, and you just can't. And then the skill gets cut. There was actually one additional skill that was meant to go into this patch that, the concept was cool, but it didn't translate well enough in game into like actual play at a moment to moment level. And it's been pulled. It'll maybe get redesigned and go into 329 with some changes, or a future patch, or become a unique item or something. We don't want to waste the assets that have been made, but yeah, like they're. That's not to say like it's only about power fantasy and class fantasy and whatever you want to call that, but it is like the starting point.
No, I think that's really cool. I love Crackling Lance. It's like one of my favorite abilities. Like, I'll run it like probably like once every 2 leagues, even though I think it is a little bit like underpowered at the moment, because like I just love the power fantasy of like big beam becomes small beam when I have to stand still and like concentrate it on something. Like, it's just such a cool ability to me. So
If you want to have the chat open,
I will
guys.
say that
That's cool.
I think next patch, it has been tabled quite a few times already, but self-cast is definitely on our radar. Oh, and there is also a new exceptional support specifically for intensity-based skills, which might be pretty good with Crackling Lance this league.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, like sometimes we'll fall a bit short in terms of the balance on those class identities and fantasies, but like, it's important to have them, because you want skills to feel distinct, because otherwise you go back to the problem we discussed earlier, where like every skill operates the same way. This one is 10% better. Why would you use these other 5 skills, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard not to fall into that trap, especially when you have triple-digit number of skills in the game. But yeah, something like Crackling Lance is a good example, where it's a cool concept that maybe just needs some more numerical love, and that could be in 329 or 330 or whatever. And it's good to have those cool concepts in the game, because you can always buff numbers in a future patch.
Yeah.
To me, it seems like arriving on the right number has got to be really hard because of certain things as far as design space go. Like I think there's certain mechanics and items and skills that restrict the design space of everything else, because in their absence, you could be a bit more like relaxed, but with their presence, it becomes ridiculous. Like things like Penance Mark, for instance. I know like on release, I actually do want to hear about that specifically when it was like introduced, but at the time of Penance Mark's release, I remember building around it because I saw the trailer. I did a bunch of like screen measurements to see, okay, is this within 1.5 radius sometimes? And I made a whole low tolerance Pathfinder proliferation setup. Skill comes out. Forget about what Peacock did on League Start, but now it's a 3.5 to 4.5 radius. And I saw, I guess, how problematic it would have been, but there's like that aspect. But then I think about like, even now with that in Southbound, you get like massive issues with overlaps. I think Nimbus is another great example of an item that might have greatly restricted design space. I've always thought about what if I just like didn't do that. Like return projectiles, kind of setting what you can and can't do in terms of introducing new projectile skills, balancing that. Do you think there's like big problem outliers that you wish weren't there? Or is it just something that's more interesting now for your problem solving to create that puzzle?
Well, I think something like Nimbus to me is more fine because it is such an extremely rare in-game item. Like, yeah, for the average player, they're probably never seeing a Nimbus. What was the other example you gave, sorry?
Penance Mark.
Yeah, no, Penance Mark is getting near Wormblaster in terms of like, or the Writhing Jar in terms of levels are problematic. Whenever we design a new skill, someone's like, but what about this and this with Penance Mark? So maybe it will be adjusted at some point because it does keep on cropping up in terms of our like QA testing.
Now, this should not be taken as there being any changes coming to this keystone, but like definitely not. Though maybe this will get clipped out of context still, we'll see. But like CI is the biggest example of this. You know, just immunity to a full damage type is very cool. Like that's super iconic. CI is an incredibly iconic keystone, and it's great that it's in the game, and it means we can't have an end game boss that's full damage chaos, right? Because otherwise you play CI build, you're immune to it. You know, you can't have this thing that's supposed to be threatening and challenging do full chaos damage, or else suddenly you can click a keystone and be completely immune to it. So like it is, yeah, exactly. But like, if you want to put cool stuff in the game that's transformative and game changing, you have to build those constraints for yourself. It's just, it's impossible not to, or else everything is milk toast. You know, everything is like flat and vapid if you don't have interesting spiky constraints that you have to build around.
Yeah, I definitely see like some things is adding more and some things is adding less in that way. Like I remember when I was going through the unique design process, when I was looking back at some of them, I'm like, oh yeah, given what happened in the next few patches, this would have, adding this one item would have actually removed 3 different items, 4 different skills, and the possibilities for like 2 different skill trees. But when it comes to like overlaps and splash, I think that's always going to be one to consider. The other thing I had about that was, I guess like it was reminding me that penance marks, that specifically, the implementation, it basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, it changed from the time that from the trailer to when it was launched, right? The skill functionality.
I think yes. The radius at which the ghosts spawn around the monster was made further away, I'm pretty sure. I don't know if there were any other changes, but yeah, that was certainly the case.
So then do you think there's been like an increasing degree of comfort from your guys' side in terms of changing the game, or like changing what's the state of balance or skill functionality or item functionality from the point at which the patch release happens on Thursday to when the patch actually drops on Friday? Or sorry, the trailer on Thursday to when the patch drops on Friday? Because I feel like from my perspective, there's been a lot more. Every day we have like a brand new list of notes, whereas back in the day it felt a little bit more conservative in that way.
Well, I guess also it is, we used to drop the patch notes on the Wednesday before the release, so we do the patch notes far earlier than before. So I guess it hasn't really changed our like freneticism in terms of like trying to get more and more changes in just before release.
Yeah, I guess you're now just like seeing a lot of the changes that would have previously been invisible at that point, because yeah, there is usually, you know, last week before release, there's something that comes together and we didn't realize, you know, this is going to be a problem, and then unfortunately you have to fix it. I want to avoid that as much as possible. Like I really dislike, one of my favorite things about the role, about the job, is being able to like show players cool stuff, and I really dislike when I show a player a cool thing and then it's like, oh wait, no, actually we have to change that. So I want to try and minimize that as much as humanly possible, but sometimes it slips through.
What do you guys think about your timings at the moment? Because I know, Octavian, in the Ziz interview, you were saying that you love that there's a certain amount of undiscovered things going into every new patch. And sure, it gets data mined and stuff, but the average player probably isn't looking at that. Do you guys now like the change where the patch notes are way earlier and people get a longer time to plan? Or do you think that there is a way that you would go back to, like maybe later patch notes and having a little bit more surprise going into the actual league start week? And I remember like waking up, like I'm Australian, like waking up at like, 2, 3 a.m. putting the final touches on builds, the morning of the league launching.
I think personally, I preferred the patch notes being on the Wednesday, but the reason for that was because I feel like on the Friday of the live stream, you get too much information overload because you have the live stream, all the new stuff, and then you also have the patch notes. So having like that teaser season prolonged from like the live stream, and then you're also looking forward to the patch notes in a few days.
Yeah. I don't know. I think this isn't going to translate into a change of policy on this front. This is just purely a personal opinion. I really like having stuff in the game that isn't in the patch notes that players can discover. Like I said on the Ziz podcast, this time around, that's all the like little campaign improvements, Like that's kind of where I put that energy. There's a bunch of little rooms in the campaign, little rewards and stuff. We showed one. I specifically asked that we not show more than one because I want them to be discovered. I want them to be found. And also that is the kind of thing that's relatively safe from data mining, thankfully, because I don't think, maybe I'm wrong on this front, but I don't think data miners can actually access like the specific locations of things within the files that control level generation.
I think uniques are the other place that's like really well hidden before the patch. Like we have no idea what the most uniques are, and like with last patch Foulborns, it like drastically shifted what the meta is, their accessibility and everything. So like I think there's other places where there's a lot of undiscovered potential.
Go into the deletion of
I mean,
historic bonus of
calls
item
back to that
quantity.
tension that I
Yeah.
was talking about earlier.
I actually watched
back when I
Snap's
was,
video like 2 days
live streaming the
ago.
game for a living, where like
It was very
before
interesting.
League Start, our game is very complex, obviously, and people just want to know that their League Start is going to be comfortable and good and solid. And so that I think that is what drives a lot of the desire to have as much information as possible, because you want to know all the variables so that you can have a comfy League Start. And I relate to that to some degree, but also I really, really like the whole community discovery aspect of it in the first week, where you see these posts of people going like, "Oh, look at this cool thing that I found that we haven't seen yet. You know, this cool new unique." So there's a balance there to be struck. I think releasing, skill changes, character changes, ascendancy changes, passive tree, all of that is very important. Having that ahead of time, but new uniques, yeah, I don't think I'd ever want to start teasing tons and tons of those before launch.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure if the exceptional supports can be data mined or not. I think they can, which is a little unfortunate. But I think you can infer where they're from, mostly from their flavor text and name, potentially. That will be the more interesting thing, how to get them all.
For those ones as well, like I'm more okay with those being something that the community discovers, because they're very much less likely to impact your League Start plan, because it's not something you get until you defeat, end game bosses probably multiple times.
Yeah. I'm with you. Like one of my favorite recent leagues was actually Mercenaries, and it was because it went from these things are useless to these things can buff you amazingly to every single day on Reddit, like a different person posting how their merc is now soloing the whole game and they're sitting there doing nothing. And like the evolution of that was like actually so cool to like watch. And like I think that if that had been solved beforehand, that would have been like a real downer on that league in particular.
I think I like the uniques thing. I think the old uniques is where I might have more concern insofar as, and this is the only time I'll lobby in this whole session. Is there any chance that when you guys change the unique tiering of a specific unique, that there might be a more public communication of that? To contextualize this, in Archnem, I made a build for Nightblade, Perfect Agony, Structural Helix, using Ungles, which was the most common unique tier at the time, or maybe second most common. And that, for some reason, it was bad, by the way. That build was bad. You can talk about bait builds. That build was worse than just not. I unclicked Perfect Agony and that build got better. Anyways, that patch, Ungles went up to I think T1 or T2. In like kind of in secret. So like on the League Start, it was one of the more inaccessible items. I wonder, could we have like a communication of that when that does happen? Because for instance, this patch we have Foulborn Ghost Wrath. Will things like that be accessible, or that would be like hard to get?
I hope not. That's so fun.
Well, interestingly, it is now easier to know when a unique has changed rarity on release than before, because you can just go to ROG in Kingsmarch and see how much dust it sells for. So I was actually contemplating if that is like if we wanted to make it more secret, and that when we change the rarity of uniques, we don't actually affect their dust cost at all. But honestly, I don't really have a strong opinion either way on whether or not we should be revealing. I just know that historically we haven't really announced weighting changes to the players.
Yeah,
you should do
this
that.
Is something
That's
that
amazing.
we would probably need to loop Mark, maybe Jonathan, in on this, because it is a very established historical trend with this game and PoE 2. So I wouldn't want to make that call without at least consulting them.
And how? Oh, sorry, John. But just before, because I was really interested in this. When an item's normal version is not very it's fine, but not exceptional. But then the Foulborn version of the item is insanely powerful. Let's use Go Thrust for the example. Is there ever going to be a splitting of the tiers, or are they always similar tiers? And again, I understand this is probably not a concrete answer area, but
I will say we have the ability to control what percentage of a time the unique does become Foulborn, or if it has more than one Foulborn outcome, we can make one of those outcomes rarer than the other. So I'm not gonna say which ones are rare and which ones are common, but yeah, we do that for a few of them.
Cool.
I hear what you're saying. It scares me what you're saying, Andrew, in particular, for sure. I think like the only reason why is, or the greatest positive that I see is like the potential for build heterogeneity at league start. Insofar as like, I think Paul Strom was kind of ranting about this the other day. The idea that all his league stars kind of need to be all based around blue or rare items, which is in a sense in a vacuum neither here nor there. But in terms of what you could do in terms of distinct builds that feel different, that are different right away, it becomes a lot hard to set plans for that, right? And so then your league start kind of looks like, oh, let's just play, explosive arrow ballista for the 10th time. Like, let's go slams again until we know. Let's do this again until we know. KBOC until we know. I feel like that could be like a really big upside, right? In terms of knowing what's still accessible to us. Not so much the new uniques, but just knowing that.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, I don't feel like the majority of unique items actually like bias towards one skill over another. Like most uniques are more of like, I mean, there are certainly a few where it's like, for example, Kinetic Fusillade, you want to stack as much reduced duration as possible. So you really need like 2 or 3 key uniques in that sense. But for the majority of the skills, I don't think they're like super unique dependent.
Okay. How do you feel, Spawn? Bounce?
I'm happy. I think that all the unique stuff. I don't know if you want to move on to a different topic, but I've got what I need.
I did want to kind of delve deeper into that content creator thing, in terms of how they impact, and streamers and build guys and all that, how they impact the meta, how they impact how people see builds and skills. Beyond just that, do you guys see it as like, or is there some perspective of it as like a bit of an arms race between creator and developer when it comes to that?
I'm not sure I follow. Like an arms race in what way?
Let's say there are currently 5 really overpowered skills in HC racing. Let's just say hypothetically, and one of them is known as seismic trap. And then next patch we discover like, I'm gonna wait and then release like DD Ignite for next patch, and then you guys are nerfing that, like, oh, can't wait for this guy to do this again, and so on and so on. Are you guys worried about, or are you guys excited about that sort of dynamic appearing? Because I've felt that way at times. Let's put it that way. Sort of adversarial nature in terms of balancing.
I don't know that there's really much that we can do about that. Like oftentimes it goes back to the whole philosophy of skill balance in PvE games being partially to try and make it not feel like there's one thing that is just drowning out everything else, right? And so if a skill becomes popularized because it's incredibly strong to the point where it feels like it's drowning out everything else, we kind of need to address that. And or if we don't, we lead to a stale meta, and that is something that people very much dislike. So whether that was because it got popular just because the numbers are obviously insane, or got popular because one person was super responsible for that popularity, like how it got to that point doesn't seem as relevant to me as like just addressing a stale meta if one comes up.
Is how like biggest popularity of skills still factoring in? Because I know it used to be like really publicly mentioned as the premier thing that you guys look to in terms of reducing power.
It's probably because of the perception, or I don't know, probably because of the fact that people will become very unhappy with a stale meta. Popularity factors in because that is a large part of what determines what a meta is. I wouldn't say it's the sole factor. Like anytime that I come to Andrew with, hey, maybe we should take a look at this skill or this archetype or whatever, Andrew's response is always to pull up a bunch of spreadsheets and start comparing balance numbers and comparing damage numbers. Like it's not like, ooh, this is really popular, make the numbers 20% lower. But it can be an impetus point for like looking at it and seeing, well, is this actually a problem? Is this actually overpowered? And in the case of like Detonate Dead, yeah, the answer is was often yes.
Actually, I had one more thing, but yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
I was going to say there's like often it's not necessarily the skill itself, but there's external factors around the skill which could be problematic instead. Like Detonate Dead. Well, Detonate Dead is very, very closely tied to Desecrate, but for example, the whole like we had years and years of players having lots of different specters so they could pollute their desecrate pool with more and more high life minions, which is a very PoE thing to do. But at some point, it's like we're balancing around a very non-intuitive way of playing the skill. So that's the reason we'd want to get rid of it.
You know what's really intuitive, but I hate, is stackers. How do you guys feel about stackers right now?
When you say stackers, are you talking about like attribute stackers or herald stacking, or is there a particular type of stacking?
I think the last time I ever talked to Chris Wilson, he said Righteous Fire was the most problematic skill in the game. This is a decade ago. Because it lets you scale life and damage at the same time. And I talk about this a lot. These days, the premier builds, I think, for endgame are still Energy Shield stack. There's a life stack, Great Wind setup, Power Charge stacking with Eternal Separation, like Elgin Hubris, and then Strength stacking. And seeing that kind of convergence, I think, in the endgame towards stacking has made some people kind of feel like build making is more linear now, less interesting, less complex, I guess, at least in terms of horizontality. Do you guys like the presence of stackers, their current power? Do you guys like that kind of building? Just general thoughts, I guess. And armor.
It's a very thorny balance problem that I've been kind of bouncing around in my head for a number of leagues now, because it has the upside of giving you builds that have these like really, really high ceilings that you can keep incrementally improving, and that's a good thing. We like, we don't want a build to become static, like at reaching level 92 or whatever, and you have, you're just kind of done. But then the other problem is exactly what you're saying. Like it sort of funnels the build making meta into, pick your top level thing that you're stacking around and then find ways to stack around that, be that ward, int, dex, strength, ES, life, whatever. And PoE 1 has become so complex with so many different avenues at this point that like it's just proliferated to a lot of different parts of the game. But it's not something that we should be like super hasty with going and just chopping away at. Like, there are upsides and downsides here, and the perfect solution would retain some of the upsides while making it feel
so it's probably gonna be like late March or something.
This is also the kind of thing that I feel like is a problem for the 1% of the 1%. Like it's a problem for people who are getting to that level 95 plus build and really investing and like, then making another build and maybe making another build and feeling like all of the build making is very similar. It's not the kind of thing that's a problem if you play one build a league to level 90 and then finish. So I don't know. I feel like I maybe went on a little circuitous rant there, but regardless, like it is something that's been on my mind. I just can't speak to any specific changes because I haven't figured out any specific changes. It's the same thing. There's a number of problems at any given moment that are always just in the back of my head, and I'm trying to come up with a solution, and usually something pops into my head at 2 a.m. some random day. Mercenaries is on that same list. Like, how Mercenaries? How? And eventually my brain will present some kind of answer. We'll see if it's a good one. I hope so.
Oh.
The way I see it is that
dude, please don't bring Mercenaries, man.
Offense and defense, right? Because all the skill and mana and armor stacking are the same. All of these stackers.
And then you're gonna put them in PoE 2 as well at some point.
Scale at a very high level, both offense and defense at the same time. But you'll notice one I'll never mention is dexterity stacking, because I think the only defensive scaler for dexterity, save for like during free and whatnot, is guard cons. Basically, you could say Shaper's Touch, right? So isn't it about the separation of those things, which kind of, from what I understand, used to be one of the core principles in terms of introducing like mechanics, items, and skills.
Yeah, I feel like over time we have added more and more things that scale both offense and defense, or scale damage off life, or scale damage off the energy shield, stuff like that. And it's certainly, like it's been brought up, as like the more and more of those mechanics you add in, they're like multiplicative with each other. So it's like making those builds stronger and stronger over time. Like it certainly has been on our radar for a while, and we are making a couple of nerfs this patch to energy shield stackers in particular. But we will like, I think we probably will make future nerfs to these type of builds.
Okay. I was wondering if it was like quantitative or qualitative from your perspective, but that's interesting to hear it that way. Swan. Yeah.
Cool. I want to completely change the topic for a little bit. Crafting is a skill in PoE that I think like is really entertaining to watch, and the people that craft the best are like actually like can separate themselves into another tier. I think crafting leagues lately have become a little bit, they do all crafting better than the other crafting mechanics in the game. Like, you know, the tree, for example, just spit out fractures better than anything else, spit out like high DPS axes better than anything else, spit out like everything better than anything else. And then like I go back to Necro, that was kind of the same. Every single piece of the gear eventually was like double fractured off Necropolis. Then you go back to like even Harvest. Does that make you scared to introduce new crafting mechanics into the game? And if not, do you think that the current power level of like, because I think you need to engage in the league mechanic, it needs to be slightly better than the other mechanics in the game, probably on launch, but it just seems like the power dynamic seems a little bit off to me at the moment, because it feels like if it's a crafting league, it feels like I don't engage in the other avenues of crafting probably as much as I would.
I think it was definitely slightly unintentional how strong the breach equipment tree went out. And it took away a lot from like fossils from my point of view. Because it's basically doing fossils but with like mod tier rating on top of it. But I also agree that if you're going to have a crafting league, then you need to make sure the crafting is front and center. So it does need to be relatively powerful and feel good to players. Do you have anything on that?
What it kind of needs to do is iterate in a different novel direction from previous crafting methods. And that's where I think both Necropolis and the tree kind of failed. Because they essentially were just, here's crafting and it's very good, and they don't have like, you know, some new thing that they're doing that isn't something that the other systems can do. Because if you can, and that's just really hard, by the way, like the crafting system in Path of Exile 1 is so tight and so, you know, extensive with so many things going on that it's really hard to iterate in a new and meaningful way. And that's probably why the tree and Necropolis didn't, because there just wasn't some fundamental new thing to throw in at the time. So like going forward, if we have a league, you know, Mirage is not super heavy on the crafting, though there are a few things you can find in Mirages through other league mechanics that may impact crafting decisions, but it's not like a crafting league, so to speak. If we have a league in the future that is more crafting centric, I'd want to make sure that it has some new, unique, novel selling point that the crafting can be built around, because then you can put the power budget there rather than putting the power budget into just, okay, it makes rares with really big numbers.
Yeah, that makes sense, because from my perspective, the thing that I liked about Necropolis is like I was playing, I think, Poison Molten Strike at the time. Like I still had to go to Heist to actually get the corpse to be able to make my pneumatic daggers, right? So I still had to engage with different parts of the game to be able to do the crafting that like I needed to do. Whereas it has felt like in the past, some
what he meant is,
were like,
you know, there wasn't a new mechanic, right? Zepgear.
Mapping, and then you were able to access.
It was just multi-fracture, okay, but it's still
it
fracture.
Seemed like
kind
strange that it would pull you away from the part of the game that item came to, but I really like that you guys are addressing that at the moment. I don't know if you feel similarly.
An emphasis on all league mechanics, and we're not in that place yet. We're certainly not in that place. But an emphasis on all league mechanics having some interesting, unique draw that you would want to do that thing for is very important to me personally. Like that I think is what gives the game its longevity, or is one of the foundational things that gives the game its longevity. Being able to go like, you know, oh, I want to specifically, you know, build around and invest into Heist or Delve or Delirium or Blight or whatever, and be rewarded in a way for doing that I wouldn't be rewarded in for doing one of the other choices I could have picked.
Yeah, I think that's very good.
My question, I guess, to that end, is there like a favorite crafting system for each of you guys?
Well, it's definitely ROG from Expedition.
Oh, I love ROG,
I
man.
think the reason I love ROG so much is because it just strikes the right balance between non-determinism and having a lot of player skill knowledge to like leverage your way to like economic returns effectively. So it's like, strikes the right balance between RNG and like me thinking that my skill is.
I mean, you said it's so shit in PvE too, man.
When I'm crafting from ROG.
ROG is a really interesting one because he doesn't actually give you anything that you couldn't get from other systems. It's more like the way of interacting with it is the thing that's unique there.
Yes, I also like how he gives you like very strange items sometimes. Like he'll give you some crazy looking item which is like might be hyper specifically very good for some random person's build, and it ends up selling for a lot.
Personally, probably fossils and resonators and delve in general. I mean, it's probably one of the reasons why we started there for this whole trying to make League mechanics more sequestered and contained, is because I have a soft spot for delve, and I like the fossil resonator system. I think it's pretty solid, despite it being almost a decade old at this point. God,
Yeah, we definitely still
maybe
use
not
them a
quite
lot.
that old.
I think it's like, it's cool because delve has like the two
Yes.
big, like
Yo,
kind of cleavages in crafting where like you can just spam a dense fossil and get some pretty good stuff, but then when you want to make your hard
Ben,
items, you can like
thanks so much,
deeply
man.
invest where every resonator is costing like
Appreciate
5
the
to
sub.
6 more
13
plus
months.
divines per like slam. From my perspective, I really thought one of you guys would have said like Recombinator. What are the thoughts? Because, or I guess Sentinel broadly, because it's a progressive crafting system that's like actually building on other things, right? But it's still separate.
I think I do like Recombinators. I think the main thing I don't like about it is the opaqueness of it, and also how much like expert knowledge you sort of need to know, because there's weird things going on behind the scenes regarding like exclusive mods and that type of thing. It's a little less clear to players exactly like how to take best advantage of it.
Yeah, it's a cool system that's not communicated as well as it could otherwise be. So there might be work to be done there. I do remember when I first joined the company, one of the first things that I asked one of the designers I was talking to at the time is, okay, so when are Recombinators coming back? It was like a month after I joined in QA.
What was that?
What was
What
that?
league would that have been? What league would that have been?
I think I joined basically as Sentinel was finishing up.
Oh, okay. So, okay. You've been kind of pushing behind the scenes. I think like they're so. I get what you're saying about the complexity thing. I feel like that's what makes it interesting to me, because my biggest problem with Tree this patch was how simple it was. Like the power is its own issue that can be just be like it's a lever that can be pulled, right? You can just change numbers, but the sheer simplicity of crafting from it, I didn't like. It was like I want defense, I want Machi, I
Yo,
want this,
Nick,
and I press
thanks
it.
for the prime
Whereas,
as
like
well.
Recom learning.
Yeah,
about
tomorrow is the
items,
Warlock
like, I think
reveals.
having
I'll also
the-
have some videos and stuff.
It's not. I wouldn't call it intuitive.
And
Like, they didn't
Campfire
feel
for
like
season
bugs to
12.
me. They didn't feel like things that were generally problematic, but they still had you like thinking about the game. Had you think about like what's possible? How do you think about why these things are possible? And then once you figure out why one thing was possible, you start thinking about why other things aren't. And I would like worry then that as we separate crafting systems and reduce complexity, that we start to lose the possibility of that, right?
Yeah, I feel like the breach tree is more like a means of getting your starting item, but given how powerful it was, it probably was like, yeah, this is your starting item and your finishing item. As in, like, once you generate the rare item, you don't need to go through further crafting systems to iterate on it. But I do also share your love for, like, just loading up Craft of Exile and, like, being like, this is the item I want to end up with. How do I get there? And then just messing around and seeing what different things I can do to maximize my odds of building that specific item.
And like all the weird little ways in which an item can be hyper specific is one of the things that drew me to Path of Exile in the first place, you know, and has just gotten more and more over time. Like you can have this item, you know, you can have one of those heist rings with extra suffixes, and then, you know, what maybe one of them is fractured and you've synthesized or changed the implicit, though I don't think that actually works on the heist rings, so maybe a bad example. You know, like you can mess with the implicits, you can mess with the corruptions, you can mess with the explicits a whole ton. You can have, you know, enchantments and stuff, and I wouldn't want to reduce that. No, I love how crazy and weird items can, or rare items in particular, can get eventually on like some Giga endgame build.
I mean, when I'm thinking about that, it's like the random item stuff I would like a lot. I like the idea of like having these weird items. Lastly, I
Made
made a
his
character
Spanish
that was
holy.
based around
Are you
a
fully
ring that had
prepped?
minus 200 mana on it. It was like a helical, and I got like a lot of reduced mana. I had, I think, 80 total mana at the very end, and I did permanent Sap of Seasons with that, because it also had like 200 mana regen. It was some weird bricked mirrored ring. But at the same time, what I'm thinking is
What the
like,
fuck?
all the systems we're talking about actually don't really interact with each other, right?
Then
Like,
5 2-stone ones. Oh my god.
Cross-cutting thread that makes a lot of crafting systems
What are you
that don't
prepping?
interact with each other. And a lot of times I don't necessarily mind or not mind whether things are made in isolation. I think it's kind of cool when like, oh, this slot for your build is best made through this system and this slot is through this system. But like that's what is really drawing me constantly over and over again back towards like recombinating.
Mana, man.
And I feel like
Okay.
the interaction between systems.
With the same build, 5 runs.
A lot of
Do you
systems
think
are
that's
in
actually
isolation.
true though?
Did I
'cause think,
iterate on it,
maybe
or
I
like what
thought
are we
that's
trying
true,
there?
But I think like essences into like Jun slams and stuff is like probably where a lot of like the base player base
Oh, yeah, the
crafting
Guild Wars.
stops, so like I think like there are some systems that overlap, and then like I mean I'm a fan of Rog as well, and then I'll just get some items that have like good modifiers and I'll just like slam them together on a recombinator to see if they actually turn into anything good, and if not they just get deleted. I think like the systems are in a pretty healthy spot from a casual perspective, I guess.
I think one of the changes that I was surprised went under the radar so much from last patch is all the harvest crafts now respecting meta mods. Like I made some very powerful items this patch, and I'm like, is this busted? But I didn't see people talking about it very much, so maybe it's not as busted as I thought it was.
I need to sit and think for like 2-3 minutes about that. Give me a sec. I'm gonna check out for a second.
I think part of it is, something like the Breach Tree or like Necropolis crafting, it's safer from a design standpoint to design
the
it in such a
current
way that it
2-stone
doesn't
run going to be
cross-pollinate
equivalent
with
of
other
1-stone
systems,
run
because
in
then you reduce the chance that you've
328?
overlooked some.
Yeah, they
incredibly
changed the
busted
progression a little bit, and
interaction.
you get the stones like
But you're
differently now, but I
absolutely correct. It's also
don't
less
remember exactly how.
So yeah.
But
like
either
I
way,
said earlier,
like
if
you're
we
kind of
do
like
another
mostly
crafting
done,
league
right?
going
With like
forward, I'd like
going
for it to be
going through the progression and like
more
getting the build online and
distinct,
stuff. So I
having its
guess it's
own
still
kind of
useful.
spin that it brings to the table, and then also probably functioning with other systems in some ways if it can. What that looks like, I don't know off the top of my head, but
You
I
get
want to find
1 stone, you
out.
get Exile and Eater. Okay.
And how does Groundlet fit into the crafting system conversation at the moment? Because like to me, at the high end, best gear normally does come from stuff that you make, and I like that about Path of Exile. But I mean, there is a lot of conversation about items on the ground, and people just hide everything apart from a certain eye level base. Where does that fit into your head when it comes to crafting?
Well, I don't think we're making like huge strides to address that or anything this patch, but we are basically saying that all those starting point items, like the items that generate with like very high modifier tier rating, are getting worse from sources like King's March and the Gambler and the Breach Tree, but better from Memory Strands, which is ground loot. And Memory Strands also has that advantage that even once you identify the item,
Yeah, I
all
get
of your
memory
future
strands. You don't
crafts
find
on
these maps that
item
often.
are
It's pretty
better
rare that you actually
because
do one of
of
those
the
maps,
whole,
right?
like, the strands add mod tier rating.
Yeah,
So-
I used strands for like the first time this week for like crafting, and the complexity there was like the things that you could do were pretty crazy, especially like thinking about like beasts and like shifting bases. Whereas when it first came out, I was like, yo, seems useless. Like I think the leg,
Thanks.
the player leg in terms of understanding systems is definitely there. And right now when you're saying the harvesting, I'm
Never used a stranded item. Yeah, I also
still
haven't
lagging
done it.
really far behind, man.
And the
I'm
idea
aware
is
of that.
cool, I think. But the
Don't
thing
say
is, like, they're
anything.
saying, okay,
I
ground
have
loot is
no
getting
idea what you're
better.
about still.
But, the
Like, in
memory
terms of,
strand
like, what
items, they
people
only drop in
do,
memory
like-
strand maps, right? Like the memory maps. And you're not going to do them
Well,
until
I think it's
who
more
knows
like
when, right? And only then
in
sometimes.
Harvest you have things
So-
like reroll.
More likely.
What is it?
Or can they drop
Reroll
everywhere?
An item with a fire
I think
mod
they can,
or a
right? It's
speed
only in
mod
those
or
memory
whatever it
maps, I
is.
believe.
Those didn't used to respect like prefixes cannot be changed and suffixes cannot be changed.
So you still have like
But I think we
99.9%
changed
of the
that
ground
last
loot that will just
patch.
never be good anyway.
Yeah,
And
that's
it
what
doesn't
was
have
Results
memory
of
strands to begin
introducing
with.
the new wand bases that have those implicits where they can't roll caster modifiers, I believe, because those work on the same system and they needed to function with that.
Yeah.
So it was just kind of a side effect.
They drop in
That
16.5.
always works,
Yeah, exactly.
I think.
It's like
We've
really
been
endgame
there
already, all the way there. Okay, you
Yeah, I
pick out
could
some
be
random
wrong.
areas, like early
There
maps,
was
and then
definitely
you
something related
roll
to
with it,
Harvest
right?
which changed,
Can I
but
roll
maybe I'm
caster
like
attack, right? Like that's what it would have been.
maybe.
I'd have to get the patch notes in front of me. There's been
Yeah,
too many
I
of
guess
them
we'll
since
see.
then. I can't remember it all specifically off the top of my head.